Have you been back to Korea?
No,
Ever?
no, never. But my boyfriend's Korean, so um, he's Korean and Japanese. So I think either someday I'll go with him, just
Mm.
him, or we have one of our really good friends is Korean, so we'd like to go with like him and his family.
Oh yeah.
Or and if we can coordinate a way for my brother and his wife to go with us, that would be amazing. We both always had just kind of this like distant relationship with being Korean. And so as we've gotten older as adults, we've both in our own ways like developed our own relation or it's a developing relationship with like our Korean identity.
Oh
So I
yeah.
always thought it would be nice for us to go together. He's like
Oh
my
yeah.
biological brother, we have the same
Yeah.
parents, but it would be nice for us to be able to have that experience together.
Mhm.
But it's been really hard to coordinate. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these stories, and we can talk about this later, but just surrounding adoption and the family members, around adoption, like your dad and things like
Mm-hmm.
that bring out, just some interesting things that people
Dynamics.
are dealing with.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, learning Korean, I'm talking about learning Vietnamese.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, for me as, an adoptee, and I mean, you see my family, there, it's like, I've always felt like I don't really belong anywhere.
Yeah.
Because I'm not Vietnamese enough to hang out with the Vietnamese community,
Right.
even within the US, right? Like Little Saigon. I mean, I have no idea. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of grew up with this Caucasian family in Wyoming.
Yeah.
But we can kind of get into that later. But
That's how I felt too. Like in college, there were fraternities and sororities that, like, I don't think on paper they were explicitly for Korean people. Maybe they were, but they were all like Korean American. They were like Korean fraternities and sororities essentially.
oh yeah,
And when I was thinking about joining um, a sorority, it never even crossed my mind because I was like, they're gonna be like, you're a fraud. You're
that is
not
so funny
even.
that you mentioned that because I went through the same thing.
Oh
So,
really?
so most of my friends growing up, I mean, just naturally were white, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
because I grew up with, and then I did gymnastics at Berkeley, and most of those guys were like, just white dudes from all
Mm-hmm.
over. I had known them from training camps and all that stuff. But we literally walked by frat, and I mean, Berkeley's like, 40% at that time Asian,
Oh
and they
wow.
wanted me to join their frat, and I didn't understand why they didn't
Why?
want my friend, because I'd be walking with them, and then some dude would come up to me, hey, you should join our frat, come to this party, da da da. And then I'm looking at them, and I thought it was weird.
Mm.
but
Like
but
why
is,
be
is
rude?
yeah, it's just strange to even think about it, like, because I never really thought of myself as Asian.
Yeah, same.
Hello, hello, and welcome to the Original Origins podcast, hosted by A Family Tree, a private adoption agency located in Honolulu, Hawaii. My name is Shayla Nichols, and I am a licensed social worker at A Family Tree. I'm also the daughter of a transnational adoptee. Thanks for tuning into our podcast, where I interview members of the adoption community about their stories. The reason this podcast is called Original Origins is because every adoption story is unique. And although, as practitioners, we sometimes generalize adoption experiences, we also recognize that no two stories are the same. Thanks so much and enjoy this episode. My guest on today's episode of the Original Origins podcast is Steve George. Steve is a board member for A Family Tree. He is also the founder and owner of Ozia Originals, which is a company that sells kava candy, a natural stress relief supplement. I'm a big fan of the kava candy. The ginger flavor is my favorite. So if you experience a lot of stress or anxiety, I encourage you to go buy some. He's also a transnational adoptee. He was born in Vietnam, raised in Wyoming by his parents, and he now lives in Hawaii with his family. And we get the pleasure of working with him on adoption related issues. So I'm really excited to have Steve on as our guest today, and I will let him tell you a little bit more about himself. Okay, so why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your adoption story?
Yeah, so I was adopted from Vietnam. I came from a small town called Can Tha, which is in the Mekong, so it's a little south of Saigon. And this is like right towards the end of the war. So at that point, they were trying to get a lot of babies just out of the country any way that they could. So they were making up documents. They're just trying to make fake passports and things like that just to get all these kids out everywhere to the US, to Europe, to Australia. And so I was one of those kids. My parents wanted to adopt, because simply they tell me they just wanted a boy and they knew that a lot of kids needed a home. So it's pretty much that simple. They were looking on the news and, all the atrocities that were happening over there. And they're just saying, oh, yeah, we already have two girls, two biological girls. Let's get a boy. And so the process was actually pretty quick for them. And then I literally arrived, I was 6 months old, and my mom got me in Denver. I flew over here from a woman that was kind of taking babies back and forth between the US. Her name was Bridget Blank, which unfortunately she had passed away a year later in an accident called Operation Baby Lift. So that was the plane that went and had over 100 orphans as babies, and you can see pictures of them in these like small wooden boxes, and that plane went down
And they all died.
mm,
Oh my God.
yeah.
So she was the the messenger, the transporter.
Exactly.
She's
Yeah.
Vietnamese.
She wasn't.
She's
Yeah.
American.
She's actually from Europe.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but she had given me she was taking care of me in the orphanage, and she had given me the name George. And then I basically found out later that I was put with the George family. So it's kind of
Oh wow.
some serendipity there.
Okay. And where did your adoptive family live? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Wyoming.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I grew up in the boondocks in a small town called Laramie, Wyoming. And it's not known for too much, but, it's a very small community. And then I did go to preschool here, actually.
Oh, in Hawaii.
Yeah, in Hawaii.
Oh.
Yeah, because my dad was a professor, and then he did his sabbatical out here. And so we just kind of kept coming back to Hawaii. We have a lot of family friends here. They were here way back in the 60s. So that's how I ended up back in Hawaii now.
Nice. And what's your relationship with your adopted family like?
It's awesome. I mean, they're so loving and understanding. I think as I get older too, I think the biggest thing that I was worried about was when I first went to Vietnam in my 20s, like late 20s. I was really scared of hurting my parents' feeling. Like, oh, maybe they think that, they're not good enough, or, I don't know how my sisters would feel. But they've been really supportive, throughout the journey. So
Great.
yeah.
And you're close to your sisters?
I am.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, they're awesome.
So how did you end up from Wyoming to back in Hawaii?
Yeah, so I went up to college on the West Coast, and then basically I just kept going, west essentially. It's kind of funny because during my whole life, I never really cared a lot about Vietnam or where I came from. We always had books around. Of course, as a teenager, watching a lot of movies on the war and, all those classic ones like Platoon and things like that, which didn't relate to adoption, but it was like, wow, this is where I'm from. You kind of start to put two and two together. But then I don't know if it's different for boys, but I started to get really interested in my story probably in my mid-20s. So it was pretty late. Before then, I just wanted to be a normal kid. I didn't want people to know about the differences on my family. Obviously, I knew because, my whole family are giants, Like, so my sisters are almost like 6 feet tall,
Wow.
my dad's 6'3", my mom, and here's this little brown kid following them around. And, I remember little things like we drove down to Mexico one time, little 1984 Toyota Tercel, thing. And I remember when we went through border security in Mexico, my mom would like put me in the back and say, hey, hide, and she'd throw a blanket over me. And I didn't really understand why. It's like, why is there a problem if I have paperwork? And then I didn't really think about it too much. Now when I look back at it, I'm like, well, it's kind of crazy. I mean, just the thought of, wow, I could get caught in Mexico because they think that they're trying to, get some Mexican kid back and kidnap him, or, whatever the situation was. So it's those things that I started to piece later on. in my life, and I just don't think that my maturity, that I was really ready enough to deal with some of those issues and how to think about it and what it meant in my life and where I would go from here.
Yeah. So the Vietnam War is covered pretty heavily in like American history classes in schools. Did you, when you were learning about when you were learning about the war, did you feel connected to it? Did you ever put two and two together? Or did it feel like something distant that was happening somewhere else that didn't relate to you?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I don't remember learning about a lot about the Vietnam War in school. I remember that we had a lot of books around and things like that. So I don't know if it was as much part of the curriculum as it is now. Um, I do remember one of my coaches for gymnastics. He's a Vietnam vet, and so we always kind of had that connection. But it was pretty rough because he had a lot of PTSD and things like that. And so a story for another time. But essentially, there was some weird stuff, kind of going on there where it was difficult to deal with at that time.
I see. Okay. So you recently traveled back to Vietnam. You said you went in your 20s. How many times have you been?
Geez, I want to say this is my fourth time.
Okay.
to
So
go back.
what was it like the first time that you went, and what was it like this most recent time?
Yeah, so for the first time that I went, I felt like I needed to go by myself because there are family members who wanted to go. I remember my cousin really wanted to go with me. Just people wanted to go, but I felt like I needed to do a solo journey first because I didn't know how I was going to feel. I didn't know how I was going to feel about the Vietnamese people. I didn't know if I would relate. I didn't know if I'd just be like a total mess. So again, this is in my late 20s. So you think about that's relatively old, but again, I think for my maturity level at that time and thinking about the issue, I think I just stuffed everything in a closet somewhere. And then now it's like, okay, let's see how I feel about all this, stuff relating to adoption and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I just kind of went there the first time. I visited some different orphanages. I tried to go to one orphanage. So I went to Kanta, where the first orphanage that I was at, and apparently I wasn't doing very well as an intensive care unit, and so I was transferred to another orphanage in Saigon. The orphanage in Saigon had since been redeveloped into a newspaper distributor, so it was no longer there.
Yeah.
And then the orphanage down in Kanta, it was pretty crazy because there were a lot of special needs kids. There were a lot of kids with cerebral palsy, things like that, which I had never seen at that level. I mean, you see those different commercials, for, look at these orphans and things like that. Yeah, exactly. But to see that in person and to really connect with, wow, I wonder what my life would have been like, and seeing all the entrepreneurship and all the street vendors and just people kind of doing their thing. I definitely connected with that. An interesting story right at the end of the trip. I was too late to go on this tour where they have adoptees come back to Vietnam and tour different orphanages and try all the food and things like that. So I reached the lady who ran the organization, Miss Phuc, and then she had taken me out to the Operation Baby Lift memorial, and it's really just a piece of the plane that's still out there. And she only knew me by my first name, Steve. She didn't know the George part. So right at the end, me and her husband and her, we had dinner, and then I was writing down my contact information, Steve George. And she's like, George, like something rang a bell, and she's speaking to a friend that I had who could speak Vietnamese. And she said, I knew like a tiny bit at that time, but she said something about a stomach and something else, and she is super excited. And she's basically like, my sister-in-law burned you on your stomach when you were little, and I have the scar on my stomach that I never knew how I got. So it's not like she had ever seen me with my shirt off or anything. So it's like, what, like literally at that time, out of 84 million people, this one person actually knows who I am. Like 28 years
She
later.
remembered just from the name George.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because this woman, Bridget Blank, gave me the name George in the orphanage. And so once her sister-in-law burned me, I guess, I mean, they were only like 14, 15, 16 at that time and taking care of these kids. And so they didn't want to get in trouble with their superior. And so that's why they knew me out of like literally 200 kids, 100 kids per room, all these kids, going in and out. They basically kind of kept me away from the superiors because they didn't want to get in trouble. Because it's like, yeah, you burn a kid, that's not good. They didn't want to get fired. And so, but that's why they had that connection specifically with me.
Wow.
And so that was pretty crazy. And so that prompted a couple more visits, kind of as a tourist, mainly. And this last time that I went to Vietnam, just this year, I went more looking for a biological family because I know that everybody who may have known me or biological mother or father might still be there, but they're getting older now. Yeah. So now I've done all the DNA tests. There's some Facebook groups, and technology is amazing because I was able to post, literally all my information, online, and that gets, basically sent to a big group in Vietnam who's kind of doing some of this work. So we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah.
But I keep hearing different stories, from people of finding biological family. I realize that I'm probably like 99% Vietnamese or somewhere from that region, Cambodian, Vietnamese. So I don't think that I had a parent that was a GI, which is a lot of the case.
I remember you were mentioning that one of the DNA sites that you used was one that I was talking about this with Brenna when I recorded her episode, but was it called Asia Family General? It's the DNA site that people on the continent of Asia generally use.
Yeah, I think Family DNA.
Oh,
I
Family
believe is the
DNA.
name.
Oh, okay.
I think so.
Okay. That's helpful to know because obviously, like 23andMe and Ancestry are American companies. So if you have biological family in Asia, they might not be using those same companies to submit their DNA to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they're doing a lot of work there in Vietnam too to basically get these tests to birth mothers because more birth mothers are kind of coming out now, and with a way to. I don't know if reunion is the right way, but to gather these women from these different villages and things like that, and to be able to let them know that yes, there are a lot of Americans, like myself, that are searching for their biological mothers, but there's no way to tell unless you take this DNA test.
Right.
So once they take the test, then those matches could be right there pretty quick. So that's really a huge ground effort that they're doing.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that you're trying to connect with your birth family. What's that process been like?
I think I've always been pretty open to it because, I've been open to the idea for a while, really since my late 20s. But then there's this whole gap of maybe a decade where, you just get back to working and you're just trying to, figure out everything else just like everybody, and then for me, it's kind of gone on pause, which I've noticed that happens with different adoptees at different times, because I was reading this one study where it's kind of like 10% of adoptees definitely don't want to know anything about the biological family. Then there's this huge indifference of about 80% of adoptees who either way they would be okay. And then there's like 10% who are just like gung-ho, I gotta find my biological family. So looking at adoptees, of course, not a monolith in a sense, but I think I've kind of gone back and forth between that 80% of kind of indifference, and I've tried here and there and nothing has come up, and now again kind of hitting those time pressures of, man, my biological mother or father could be looking for me. And I keep hearing bits of information like, oh, if you were at the orphanage at that time, a lot of times they use that for daycare in a sense because they didn't have the resources. And so when war is going on and things like that, they literally may have just not been able to get to you.
Wow.
Or something. And so from their side, maybe they wanted me, in a sense.
They didn't intentionally place
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, things happened, and and then all of a sudden your baby is lost or gone or got moved, somewhere else without their knowledge.
Do you think that you would be crushed if you found out that your birth parents had passed?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that it would be hard, um, but I guess I'll just have to go through it. I'm open to going through that process, with an open heart and seeing how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I do wish, I do feel a little bit of guilt because I do wish that I would have been looking harder at this point. Even from my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like putting out an ad or like doing something. More. It does kind of give me hope that the DNA tests that I have done on Ancestry, on 23andMe, on Family DNA, these other things, that it hasn't come up with anything, maybe like some fourth cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So even if I had done it before, that part would still be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how, I mean, outside of hiring like a private investigator, how people did it before DNA testing was an option. Like the technology advances have made, I know that for Russian adoptees, there's this, because like, I don't know if the laws, the policies, the adoption process itself from Russia, like 20, 30 years ago was so different. So there's this huge community on like the Russian equivalent of Facebook where people find their birth families all the time just from like social media. But prior to social media and DNA testing, like it would have been so much harder. I can imagine.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, technology and even Facebook, I've realized, just kind of going on there before this trip to Vietnam, that there's so many different groups, out there of like, there's this whole group on specifically Kanta Providence orphanage where I was, and there's like, 100 people in there or something, and we're literally all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, we were from this orphanage, we know nothing about our biological family, but we're trying to look for them. And it's like, how does this even exist?
Yeah.
And all these people from all over, like literally all over the world. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine it's probably pretty easy to fall down like a rabbit hole, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I started the process of trying to find my dad's birth family or just any information that I could. But I could truly probably spend like 40 hours a week doing it if I wanted to, because there's so many different avenues
Oh yeah, yeah,
to explore.
absolutely. And then hearing about those success stories too, right? You're just like, huh, if that person was able to do it,
Why can't I?
yeah,
Yeah.
should be able to figure it out. Right?
Yeah. So in what ways do you feel like your adoption has impacted your identity?
I think, we were kind of brushing on this before, and I've always felt like, and this took me a long time to get there, but it's almost simply as saying that I kind of feel like a child of the world. If that, it might sound kind of cheesy, but I've never really fit into any identity in a sense because, I'm not Asian enough, I'm not Vietnamese enough. When I go to Vietnamese, oh, you're Vietnamese, but you don't speak Vietnamese, that type of thing. And especially up north too, right? Just like, who are you, type of thing. And then I heard even within the Vietnamese community itself, right? All the Vietnamese who live in Little Saigon, down in LA and stuff, you do feel a little bit different than, someone who lives in Vietnam and has lived there all their life. You have, different values and you're used to growing up in a different country and all that stuff. And so growing up in a Caucasian family in Wyoming, that even adds another layer to, well, I'm not just like a normal kid in California surrounded by a lot of other Asians or in New York City or something. It's like I'm literally in this pretty homogeneous population where, remember I did know one other girl who was adopted from Vietnam, who I still keep in contact with. Actually FaceTimed her because she's never been to Vietnam before, and so for her to be able to see that and have that connection, which is nice, but that's kind of it, And so, going back to your question, I think being able to have the empathy, or I think it gives you empathy to understand people's situations and understand family dynamics. That's why I think Hawaii feels so natural to me, because everybody's kind of everything. And when you ask about it, it's not like a lot of times, like, why are you asking? Because you think that it's bad or good. It's just kind of common, to me anyways. And even here, people, you know, I say, hey, they just think that I'm local. They
Right,
start
yeah.
speaking to me in pidgin, and then when I open my mouth, I can't pass it out. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's just like, it's strange in that respect. So again, I'm not really fitting anywhere, but also kind of understanding, those dynamics throughout the world, and it's kind of been I guess, a blessing in a sense, just being able to travel and like kind of fitting in at a superficial level.
Even in Mexico.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I'm in California, my nickname in college was the Mad Mexican. Like literally, like all my teammates, called me that. Yeah. And then, I remember I went to, even like Morocco one time, or kind of close to the Middle East or something. Could just walk around, no one batted an eye. I was dating a Caucasian girl at the time. When I went around with her, people would literally stalk us for like 3 days. So I mean, kind of like understanding, I guess weird places in the world of how you look, but then also knowing inside that, wow, I don't really truly fit anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, it is truly such a unique experience to be born somewhere and then entirely displaced at the age like 6 months, a year, 3 years. Because even like Vietnamese immigrants, if they came here at that time, they would have come with their family, like their their biological family, and you just came alone. So do you like Vietnamese food?
Oh my gosh, love it.
I think I'm gonna get Vietnamese food tonight. I think.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard not to.
Yeah. So I went there with my wife this last time. This is the first time that she went to Vietnam.
Oh wow.
She loves it.
Mm.
Totally loves it. But one of the reasons, of course, is the food. Like not that we're like huge like foodies or anything, but we just like trying a lot of different
You
foods.
just appreciate good
Yeah,
food.
and we're just like, if there's one country that we had to eat their food for the rest of our lives every day, Vietnam is it. Because we were probably eating like 7 times a day, but we actually were like losing weight. The food is just so fresh, and it's not like real heavy. So I mean, it's just like it's kind of like a perfect match. We want to keep going back, and naturally that kind of fits into what I'm trying to do as far as finding biological family and stuff. But
Right.
yeah.
Awesome.
You like Vietnamese food?
Yeah,
Good.
I do. There's this place on Wai Lai we always go to, Super Pho. It's like our spot. So
Oh, nice.
yeah. Now I'm definitely gonna get it tonight. But
Yeah.
you kind of mentioned this a little bit already, but how do you feel like adoption has impacted your view of the world, or your just perspective on life?
Yeah, I think just being more open, and I've talked to this about other adoptees, is, if you were to ask yourself, well, what's your superpower? I think that empathy is truly the superpower of an adoptee. Because I think that adoptees who I talk to, whether you're going through anxiety, depression, mental health issues, whether you have a parent who's addicted, whether you have like all these certain issues that come into play with adoption, also come into play with life. And so just like knowing that no one's situation is the same, and having empathy and allowing themselves to go through whatever they're going through and be a supportive role in that. Again, I hope to think that it's a superpower in a sense.
Yeah.
Because I know that, some people can't relate to other people's stories. And when I talk to other adoptees, and they just get it. You know what I mean? There's not even like, those upfront questions of like, do you understand, or, do you get these certain issues of feeling alone, or feeling abandoned, or feeling like you don't want to disappoint your parents, or that someone may leave you, anytime, or, all these different things that come up in normal relationships with biological kids. But, I think it's the same thing for foster kids too. I think it's that situation lends itself for that person to ask themselves those questions, a lot as they're growing up, or for me, when I got older, really started asking those questions, and then also understanding, why can't I see that person's side in the
Mm.
story. Like I always feel like I can see another person's point and then try to bridge the gap between, okay, what don't I understand and what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So what's something that you would want other adoptees to know? What would be your message?
I think that it's important to know that there's a community out there for them. And so I was trying to think of this as like there's not really an adoptive community per se, but then I was like, that is the community,
Mm.
because just other adoptees just kind of get it, and you look at their family and we're kind of looking at these pictures and a lot of people, they're just like, they're trying, you can tell that they're trying to figure out in their head, not that that's bad or anything. It's just something where, when you grew up with that, they already get all those things.
Mm-hmm.
They already get, like, when we walked into like literally every restaurant possible in Laramie, Wyoming, why just people stare at you.
Mm.
And again, not that it was a bad thing or people were like inherently mean or anything,
Just curious.
but just curious and kind of like, I don't get it. Or that feeling, did they kidnap that kid? Or like, what's going on, type
Yeah.
of thing.
Is there anything that's outside of the status quo makes people wonder?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. People are just trying to figure it out. But
Yeah.
yeah, so when I see that makeup of, different family dynamics and stuff, like, to me, my mind isn't already jumping to like whatever conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like,
It is what it is.
yeah, just, yeah, almost don't even question it in a weird way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of like,
Just
they're
mind your
doing
business.
they're doing their thing. Yeah.
Nice. What's something that you want people who are maybe considering adoption to know if they're listening to this and adoption's been in their hearts and minds and they're thinking about taking that step?
Yeah, I think like just being open to the process, and really being open to the process as far as talking about empathy a lot and things like that, but that adoptees aren't a monolith. They aren't. I don't know if a lot of parents feel this way, but they look at other adoptees who have been successful, for example, and they're just like, oh, I want like a kid like that, or I want a kid to look that way, or I want a kid to be that way, and if you're looking for that, I think that that's kind of tough because it puts your child, especially if they're just a baby or 2 or 3 years old, in a difficult situation to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that whether you're adopted or not, a lot of parents will put pressure, on a kid to, do well in school and be a certain way and do all that stuff. But I do think that adoption might add another layer and complexity that I think that parents should be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And can do. And if they are, I think that they'd make wonderful parents.
Yeah.
And that they should do it and go for it. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of adoption, and I think it's wonderful for the child. I think that it's wonderful for the parents. But just to have an open mind throughout that process, and even with my parents too. Again, I had books around, with the Vietnam War, all that stuff. I just wasn't that interested.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just wanted to fit into whatever Laramie, Wyoming was.
Just like any kid. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, later on, like, where is this coming from? Holy cow, my kid wants to go to Vietnam now? They want to find their biological family? Why?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a tough conversation with my mom. I mean, she was wonderful about it. But for me, it took me a long time to muster up the courage
So guilty.
to just be like, Mom, something's missing. I don't know what it is. It's not you guys.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you have that with a parent? Especially a parent who like literally gave up their lives. Like, I don't want to say gave up their lives, but you know what I mean?
Sacrifices.
Yeah. To give you the life that you have, and I'll always be like so grateful for that.
Mm.
And so, again, having that conversation, even now, it's still like, it's a hard conversation to have, because you want to phrase it the right way, and you want your parents to feel okay about it, and to truly understand the real reasons why you're doing that. And so if parents can deal with that, even when their kid is like 50 or 60 years old, I know it sounds kind of funny, but to have that mentality that that child that's in this world is gonna have their own life and their own thoughts and things like that, and their own timeline, to do things. So just be patient with that.
Yeah. We talk a lot about in our trainings, we talk about dismantling expectations, and like you said, it's natural for parents in general to have expectations of their child, but there is that that layered complexity about some adoptees feeling like a fear of whether or not their parents' love is conditional, and so if they don't rise to those expectations, then there's just that continued fear of like abandonment or rejection. So how did you become involved with the family tree? I mean, obviously I have been here only for 2.5 years, so when did that relationship start?
Yes, geez, so that relationship started, I want to say 2008.
Oh, wow.
And what year is it now? 2023. I'm like, it's almost longer than you've been alive. But, I've always wanted to get involved, with adoption in some way, and I didn't really know how. So it actually came up through kickball.
Oh, wow.
Believe it or not. So basically one of my friends who I worked with, she started this like kickball, league. And so she had built all these teams and got these sponsors and stuff, from around town. And basically the winners got a prize that they could donate to a nonprofit. And so I'm just like, I'm gonna come down here, to the offices where it was before, introduce myself and say, hey, look, I'm an adoptee. I'm playing this kickball thing. If we win it all, you guys are gonna get some money. Is that cool? Christine was like, oh, awesome. And then they ended up like coming to some of our games.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, and this is like the inaugural this is like the first season, right? So we actually ended up winning it that year. And so they got like one of those like, big size, check things and all that stuff. But that started off a relationship. And then I had spoken on a couple of adult adoptee panels and things like that. And then Christine had asked me, hey, why don't you come onto the board? And then that's how I've been with them since.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And it's been a good experience.
Oh yeah, no, it's been wonderful, and I'm excited for you guys to see where you take this. I know that the adoption landscape, has changed quite a bit, but I think that there is so many things, that can be done, and I just think it's wonderful the work that you guys are doing. So.
Yeah. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you. Always, of course, with the support of the board.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's a movie, book, or TV show about adoption that you feel accurately represents, if there is any, your experience?
Oh my gosh, so you given some questions, kind of before this for me to think about. So I rewatched Lion.
Oh,
have you ever seen Lion?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, so I was working on some stuff. I just kind of had it on the background because I've seen it before. All of a sudden, within like 20 minutes, I'm entranced, in this movie again. And like literally in tears. And it's like, I know why, but his story is a little bit different, right? He gets lost, split from his parents, and then he goes, back to meet his mom. True story. Mine is a little bit different, but the feeling that you get through the weaving of the story of him, living in this environment, which he'd probably never imagined may have even saved his life. And then kind of having the difficult times and the difficult conversations with his family and trying to explain those, and sometimes not being able to explain those. Because it's, when you're going through it, and I've gone through those emotions as well, it's really hard. You don't even know like what's missing, or if something is missing, or what you can do to solve that. So you get very solution oriented. Like him, it's like his friends brought it up, at a dinner, and he just broke down, and it's very difficult, for him. And I've had times in my life, where friends would bring up stuff and I just didn't want to deal with it. But then seeing him kind of go back and go through that journey and finding his mother was just like, man, that just, I don't want to say it rips my heart out the way that he had to kind of go through that, but also it fills my heart. So just, I don't even know what it is, but that movie just drained me in a good way.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like that relief that you get, like if I found my biological mother or something, that just the journey itself is enough. But to actually see it, it's
Yeah.
like, again, I don't even know, the exact relation there, but yeah,
Mhm.
that's a movie that worked me.
Yeah, that's a good one. I
Yeah.
always recommend that to people.
Do you have a favorite or?
Um, I don't know if I have. I've seen so many adoption movies and TV shows and whatever because I mean, obviously, because of my personal relationship with adoption, it always just kind of intrigues me. There is this documentary that I watched. I can't remember what it was called. I'll have to look it up and put it in the show notes. I'll also put line in the show notes so that listeners can watch it. But it was this documentary about the contemporary Korea. There's like a home for young pregnant women who are considering adoption. So it's I mean, getting pregnant out of wedlock is still very taboo in Korea even to this day. So there was this home for mostly like teenage girls in their early 20s who were pregnant or had just given birth and they were considering adoption and it was really hard to watch because especially for the girls who had already given birth they had bonded with the baby and then for whatever reason for the girls who had decided to place they filmed them like handing the baby over and they were very emotional and so that was kind of I mean it was sad and it was also interesting to see it playing out even still in real life and I'm sure it's a lot different now than it was in the 70s but that was interesting.
Have you ever seen Daughter from Da Nang?
No.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because it's a documentary of this one girl, I believe from Tennessee. She goes back to Vietnam and she goes to Da Nang, where she's from, and she meets her birth mother.
It's a documentary? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that she left, I want to say when she was 5 or 6. She might have been a little bit older, but she speaks a little bit of Vietnamese.
She's pretty old.
Yeah, she was older, yeah. But it brought up a lot of issues between, and this is what I went through too, between, are they their family for love or money? Is basically like the big question because, she goes back as quote unquote this rich American, right? And she's just, like middle class, whatever. And she really felt like their family was after their money. Could you imagine you meet your biological family, and
It's
then
like
automatically, yeah. I mean, my interpretation is that I wish she would have had, again, I'm talking about empathy, but to understand that some people who live in those villages and where she's from and stuff, like literally, like some of the relatives like don't have lights, they don't have, meals every day, things like that. So when you look at just that basic need for human survival and understand, oh my gosh, here's someone in the family that can help with that. That's huge. I don't blame them at all. I mean, I'd be the same way. Like if you're put in that situation for a long period of time, I mean, you don't have the luxury to think about that this person, like, oh, you love them and to have these deep conversations and, it's just like, dude, we gotta find a meal, today.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting because I saw that when I first started kind of going to Vietnam, and so you always think, oh, if I ever do find my biological family, are they just after me for my like middle class American, life? You know what I mean? Type of thing.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure a lot of adoptees kind of go through that, and in places like Vietnam, India.
Yeah, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, in order to, it's difficult to fulfill that need for love when your basic needs aren't yet being met. So, well, that's all of the questions that I have. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about your experience, or did you want to plug Kava Candy?
All right, well, if anybody gets nervous doing podcasts,
Mm.
which you seem like you're doing great.
Yeah, it's actually it feels very natural since I've started. doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Anyways, you can try Kava Candy. I've had this company for a while, and it's been fun, and we'll continue to do it.
Yeah, no, it's so great. As adoption professional, they're really helpful throughout the day.
Yeah, maybe it's helped me through this adoption process, like
Yeah.
subliminally. You know,
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
It's like something's going on with me. Maybe I need to create something. You know,
Sponsoring your growth journey.
Yeah.
Okay, well, awesome. Thank you so much for being here and for being our guest on the podcast. We'd love to have you back again.
Yeah, no, thank
Sure.
you so much, for doing this, and I think it's wonderful that you're, talking to all these people and doing what you do. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
thanks, Sheila.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Please remember to subscribe and leave a rating or review. Follow our socials at A Family Tree. And if you have any feedback or know someone that should be featured on this podcast, please head to our website, afamilytree.org, and fill out the form on our podcast page. If you'd like to make a donation to our organization, you can do so on our website as well.